In this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, we are going to talk North Carolina hoops. North Carolina got a big commitment from Caleb Wilson last night. So Richard Stayman is here to share his thoughts on Caleb Wilson, Ian Jackson, Drake Powell, and I'm going to ask him, what is wrong in Chapel Hill? Stay tuned. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. I am your host, Rafael Barlowe, along with my co-host, Richard Stayman, Mr. Mavs Draft. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And also, check out the Locked On newsletter because your favorite Locked On NBA podcast has a newsletter. It is your one-stop shop for ultimate team and league coverage. Check it out at LockedOnDaily.com. And if you are not subscribed to the Locked On NBA Big Board YouTube channel, please subscribe, like, share, comment. Make sure you click the bell so you can be notified every time we drop an episode because we are coming at you 5 days a week. We are your daily source for NBA draft content. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about North Carolina because they had a big commitment last night. It was too late for me to stay up to watch. I tried. I ended up falling asleep, but Caleb Wilson committed. And here to talk about Caleb Wilson and the state of North Carolina hoops is Richard Stayman. What's up, man? How's everything going your way?
Hey, it's been good. I feel that. I also went to bed because I remember seeing on Twitter, they're like, he's going to announce momentarily. An hour passed, and then Tipton just broke it on Twitter. He was just like, all right, he committed. So I also got burned by that. But very excited for what's coming in Chapel Hill. They're finally back on the map getting these 5 stars continuously. I mean, they got Ian Jackson, Drake Powell last year, who we're obviously going to talk about, but then Caleb Wilson's their highlight player for next season.
Yeah, back to the commitment. Very unique to have your commitment on TNT after a West Coast game. You basically eliminated the whole eastern part of the United States unless they're going to stay up until, 1 o'clock in the morning. Was it midnight? I know when I went to bed, I saw a tweet from Isaac Shade, who is with the Locked On Network, and he had mentioned that he was staying up to watch the commitment, and I guess they showed Shaq's toenails or something like that on the show. Something I don't mess with inside the NBA. I think it's bad. I just think it's just bad. So I wanted to stay up and watch it. Ended up not doing it. Had to wait until I got up in the morning to see where he committed. I assumed he was going to North Carolina. Like, would you sit next to Kenny Smith and commit to Kentucky or Ohio State? But anyway, for those that are listening, tell us why North Carolina fans or NBA draft fans should be excited about Caleb Wilson, who, correct me if I'm wrong, is he the highest ranked North Carolina prospect in like the last 20 years?
Let's fact check that. That sounds like it. I think it's him, and it might be Harrison Barnes. Harrison Barnes is the only one that comes to mind.
That makes sense. Well,
outside of Harrison Barnes, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I can't think of anybody else who comes to mind. I know 247, I think, tracks that stuff. I'd be shocked if it's anybody but Harrison. But yeah, same thing. You knew he was on in North Carolina. Like, there's no way. None of the other guys had ties to any of the other schools. It wasn't like it was Auburn, LSU, and North Carolina. Then it would have been really interesting. But obviously, he was going to North Carolina. North Carolina is getting a fantastic player in Chapel Hill next year. The 2025 recruiting class is absolutely loaded. Him and Nate Ament were the last two to commit. Nate Ament still hasn't committed out of that top 10. Essentially, what you're getting out of him is extremely toolsy 6'9" guy who could become a wing, could become a versatile four. Both outcomes are kind of to be determined. His athleticism is off the charts, can step into some crazy shots. It just does some wild things that you don't see for someone his size. But what comes with that is inconsistency and turnovers. That's the kind of stuff he has to tune down. But the 3-level scoring upside with defensive versatility is very real. How much he puts together, though, that's up to him in the coming years.
So we're talking about Caleb Wilson, a 5-star recruit who signed with North Carolina. Yeah, I read it this morning. I forgot which site I read, but it said I think I guess there's so many sites depending on which site you trust or you decide to go by. But this particular article had him as the number 8 recruit in the class of 2025, but the highest rated North Carolina recruit since 2000. That was very, very quick of you to think of Harrison Barnes, because at one point Harrison Barnes was the number 1 player in the country. I don't know if he finished at number 1, but I remember him being like the number 1 player in the country in high school.
Well, remember he was like the only or the first preseason All-American as a freshman.
Yes.
That's why that, for whatever reason, when that happened, that moment stuck with me forever. I can remember that better than what I ate for lunch yesterday. I don't know why. Sometimes my brain is weird like that.
And I had to go back and think, like 2000, like in my mind, that doesn't seem like it was that long ago.
Like
but
10
then
years
I'm like,
ago.
it's 25 years ago. And so I'm like, all right, what year did Felton and those guys come out? So that was like 2005 when they won the championship. So they would be after that class. So anyway, do you think that he is worthy of the hype, like all the buzz around him? Do you think he's a legitimate top 10 prospect in a loaded 2025 class?
I think so. I mean, you look at, I feel like with 2025, most of these guys in the top 10 would be in the top 5 of most other years. Like, it is a ridiculously loaded class. In my ranking, I have him 5th just because the upside is so intriguing. Like, even if he doesn't hit, you have to take a gamble on him. He can pass. He's 6'9". He's super athletic, can do a lot of different things on both ends. You just have to take the upside play on that kind of archetype. Even if he doesn't work out, like, he's going to be somebody that gets a lot of different chances.
So you have number 5.
Yep.
Who's your top 5? So
I've got Cam Boozer, AJ DeBonsa, Darren Peterson. I could do any 3 in that order. There's really no wrong answer for me. Then I've got Koa Pete. I've been a big fan of what he does.
Okay.
And then Caleb Wilson as my number 5.
Yeah, I knew the top 3 were solid. Didn't know which order, but I was just trying to figure out who was number 4 because, you know, there are quite a few options there at number 4. So North Carolina is getting a high upside, toolsy guy. Is there anybody that he reminds you of? Is there anybody that you see shades of? And it doesn't have to be like a one-of-one. It could be like multiple players. You see a little bit of this guy sprinkled here, this guy sprinkled there.
Yeah, I mean, the dream is like, I don't think it's 1-to-1, but a lot of shades of like what Paul George has turned into, where it's like, you know, it talks about the playmaking being a little bit there, where it's enough to buy into. He can be versatile defensively, and he can be just a crazy 3-level scorer. I think the shot needs to come along a lot to get there, but he also reminds me a little bit of Ace Bailey in a lot of ways, where it's like the traits of just raw tools everywhere. But how much of it is actually going to come together now? I think he'll be a better playmaker than Ace has been, but lacking in some of the difficult shot-making efficiency that Ace has shown, especially in recent weeks.
So if he's Ace Bailey, that means he is going to be the guy that analytical draft Twitter hates.
Yes.
It was Brandon Miller 2 years ago, the year before, and then right now it's Ace Bailey. The analytics community absolutely hates Ace Bailey. I've seen some of those guys don't even have him in like their top 5 or top 10. So you think Caleb Wilson has like similar shot selection or?
Yeah, he's going to be polarizing. He is. But that's the thing though, is like, that's what makes this fun is everybody has their type of player they really like. I mean, a 6'9", wiry, athletic dude with super long arms that can potentially play make and score at all 3 levels. Why, like, that's such a fun archetype that there becomes like a little bit of a free area where you can kind of just grant them like, oh, it's fine. Like, they have all these tools. You can kind of understand the mistakes. I mean, I'm pretty analytically oriented these days, but there's a balance to it. And I think that these kind of 6'9" guys, they all have that in common. All 3 of these and almost back-to-back years, all of them have that in common where it's like, you kind of have to take a chance on the archetype. And sometimes the numbers aren't that pretty, but the skill set and the abilities and the tools eventually come together.
Yeah, and my theory about it is the guy that can't dribble, that only shoots threes and finishes in transition is going to look better analytically than the toolsy 6'10" wing that can handle the ball a little bit, that has a higher usage, that is going to take difficult shots. And so right now, I just think the analytics are getting totally out of hand. All right, up next, we're going to talk about Ian Jackson, who was a top recruit for North Carolina last year. I want to hear Richard's thoughts on Ian Jackson. I am a big fan of Ian Jackson, so I'm going to hear Richard's thoughts on what he thinks of Ian Jackson as a 2025 NBA draft prospect. All right, before we get into the second segment, let's talk about our sponsor for today, which is FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets. If you win your first bet, that's $300 to keep the action going. And the FanDuel app is very simple and easy to navigate. It has a variety of bets that keeps the game very exciting. And the FanDuel app is simple. It is very easy to navigate, and the variety of bets will keep the games exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. So there's no waiting around to get your cash. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or your favorite players, or you're just looking to add some excitement to the NFL playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com and join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, second segment, Ian Jackson. He's actually one of my favorite players in this class. He's a bucket. He's a guy that he can put the ball in the hoop. He can score. He's been efficient. Now he's coming off a game where he struggled, but it was like his first game, and I want to say like a month and a half where he struggled. I think he's turned North Carolina's season around in a sense. I mean, they're 12-8 right now. They're 5-3 in the conference. So I guess you can't say it's turned all the way around, but North Carolina has been better, in my opinion, since they increased his minutes and put him in the starting lineup. I feel like they should have unleashed him earlier. I think Ian Jackson is in the lottery range, even though he doesn't pass the ball. But I still like what he brings to the table. I get there's some concerns about what position he plays. There's a small margin of error for like a guard that doesn't necessarily pass. But what are your thoughts on Ian Jackson?
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster of a season for me with Ian. I really liked him coming out of OTE, and honestly, even in I want to say it was the U16s a few years ago where he was on, or maybe the 17s, one of those. I was really impressed. The raw talent has always been there. Like this stuff we're seeing now where it's like, I'm going to isolate you. You can't stop me. That kind of stuff I'm an absolute sucker for. I really like that. I think that stuff has always been there, but a little bit of inconsistency because he's young and a freshman. Now, though, what we've seen, especially over the last month and a half since December, I would say, like the first month of the season was rough. I was moving him down on my board every time I watched him because he was struggling on defense. He wasn't making passes. Still really hasn't changed in that regard. Like the game in, I want to say Maui, he tells Drake Powell, hey, go to the corner. And he sits there just dribbling the air out of the ball as Drake Powell's wide open in the corner. And he's like, no, not it. And you don't see that anymore. I think that kind of stuff where the red flags were there in November. Now it's a lot of that has gone. Defensively, he's rotating really well. He's just improved on all of his weaknesses mid-season, which I think is something you don't see often. And now the stats actually look really good. So the eye test and the stats are aligning. He's 100% aiming towards the lottery appearance right now.
Yeah, I think there's some teams that could use him. I don't know where they're at in the lottery right now, but the team that came to mind is Golden State, simply because they need some scoring off the bench. I don't know what Golden State is going to look like next year. I mean, I understand why. I can't think of the guy's name that left, the old GM that put the team together.
Oh, Myers.
Yeah, I understand why Myers left to go to ESPN. And I mean, Mike Dunleavy Jr. has a difficult situation ahead. He already had a difficult choice with letting Clay go in a sense, but I think they need some firepower off the bench, a Jordan Poole type player. Now, how valuable would he be once Steph and Draymond are gone? I don't know, but I was just thinking of teams that could use like some instant offense off the bench, someone that can create their own shot. And I thought Ian would be somewhat of a good fit there, but I like him. Like I said, I like what he brings to the table. I know like the efficiency numbers around the rim aren't like great, but I think they could be better because he just has a tendency to add a little bit of extra sauce on his layups. Like sometimes he'll have an easier layup and he'll make it a little difficult, but he's a bucket. He's a guy that can score, and I think there is room for guys like that in the NBA. However, I understand why someone may be hesitant simply because we've seen a lot of guys that are really gifted scorers and they may struggle in a complementary role, in a low usage role, and they end up going to China, playing their natural role and averaging 40 and 50 points a game and getting paid a lot of money there. But Ian can shoot. Sometimes those guys are more so shot makers than shooters, but Ian has proven to be a pretty good three-point shooter. So that's why I'm high on him. What is your draft range for him?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a surefire green room invite at this point. I think outside of the lottery is probably the end of like the teens is probably his worst case scenario. I agree with you on the Warriors, by the way. I mean, they're bottom 10 in off the dribble shooting in just terms of they don't shoot off the dribble. Like everything's catch and shooter at the rim. And that is something that they're one of two playoff teams to be in that window right now. Like I'm not counting Orlando because they've had some struggles, but like the only other team is Memphis. And so they definitely need that. I think he'd be a good fit. I would say, yeah, he's probably give or take 14. And also, like, I feel like a lot of his stuff is a lot smoother than those guys you talked about that, you know, they go to China like Jordan Crawford or someone like that, right? Where it's like these guys are killer scorers, but it just doesn't win. I think Ian is so young and that he's actually pretty efficient. I think it'll eventually turn into pretty like winning basketball.
Yeah, he's averaging 14.7 points, shooting 48% from the floor, 37% from three on around 5 attempts per game. But the most glaring number is he averages 0.9 assists per game, which is pretty interesting for a guard to not average 1 assist per game. He averages he averages like more fouls, almost his fouls almost double his assists per game. That is a unique stat that I don't think I've ever seen. All right, up next, we're going to talk about Drake Powell. Drake entered the season with a lot of buzz, and I want to hear Richard's thoughts on where Powell ranks currently on his unofficial big board. Stay tuned. All right, let's talk about our new sponsor, which is Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help you manage stress. It can help you improve sleep and even help you become a better communicator. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into your busy schedule, now that can be a challenge. And that is where Talkspace can come in and help. Talkspace is the leading virtual therapy provider. It makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, it is very simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, and you can usually get matched within 48 hours. It's convenient. You can do the sessions from the comfort of your own home. You can even message and talk to your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there is a $0 copay. It has never been easier to prioritize your mental health. As a listener to this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA. But you must enter the promo code SPACE80. You'll get matched with a licensed therapist at Talkspace.com/LockedOn80. But remember, enter the promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and also show support for the show. All right, last segment, Drake Powell. I had Drake at number 12, I believe, on my Big Board 1.0. I was intrigued with the motor, the defense. I thought he was a better offensive player than he was given credit for. One of the things I liked about Drake Powell, in a sense, was when I watched his high school film, he went to like a regular high school. Like you saw, it was like a high school. He wasn't at like the IMGs or the Montverts or these loaded schools that had a bunch of players. It looked like he went to a high school where he played with kids in the neighborhood, which allowed him to show much more of his offensive game than some guys that, have gone to these powerhouse schools. And so I thought he was going to be able to show at least more of his, or I'll say this. I thought he had more offensive game than he is given credit for. Everything you heard about him was his defense, his defense, his defense, his defense. Other than a few games here and there, he hasn't really been able to showcase everything he can do on the offensive end. I think a lot of it is because, just with North Carolina, with RJ Davis being back, and then Seth Trimble was starting. I mean, Ian had to have some spectacular games just to even get himself in the rotation. With that being said, I want to hear your thoughts on Drake Powell. Do you have him as a first rounder? Do you think he's someone that is best suited to come to school or return to school and play a different role? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I can see you going both ways. I'm still pretty high on him. I have a first round grade. I think he slides very well into that traditional 3-and-D give or take kind of window where it's like, I think the defense has been really good. It doesn't amount always to blocks and steals, but I think he's pretty sound. Like, you're not going to lose rotations because of him. Like, he's going to keep the game plan afloat. I think that kind of stuff is really big. He's still shooting 38% from three, like 40% on catch and shoot jumpers. So that's obviously very good. He's efficient around the rim, like 60%. So analytically, like, those kind of off-ball guys profile well. Could he go back to school and do like the Alex Caravan? 100%. I just don't know what he'd look like next to Caleb Wilson. And you never know what the transfer portal brings. You never know who's going to come in and take your job, kind of thing. And so you have to kind of strike when the iron's hot. I think he has to at least test the waters. He can't just go, I'm not even going to look. I'm just coming back to Chapel Hill. I don't think that's on the table.
Yeah, I definitely think he should test the waters. I mean, if you're a top 50, 60, 70 guy, you should at least test the waters and get some feedback. But he's a guy that in normal years, I would say go. But then now with NIL, that kind of eliminates the money thing where you're saying, well, I need to go to the draft because I need to take care of my family. And not saying that is his situation, but usually in years past, the money was a factor, right? You can make a lot more money than your family has ever seen in, the NBA. Now you can actually make more money as a college player, at least for 1 year. You can make more money returning to college than you can if you were the 31st pick and so on. And so I'm torn with him. Do you go back to school and show more of your offensive game? Because right now he's averaging 7 points a game. The numbers are good. The efficiency is good. But could he be a higher pick next year if he has a higher usage and he doubles his points per game from 7 to 14? Does he end up being that lottery pick that some people projected him to be coming into the season? So I'm kind of torn. And I'm sure he can probably get a nice chunk of change if he decides to return to college, whether it's from at North Carolina or someone else. I'm torn because I don't know if he's a 100% of a lock in the first round. And to me, if you're not 100% lock, then I think it's almost safer to return to school.
Yeah, the second round money may be less than the NIL money, like you said. Like, that's kind of where I would be too. And who knows what happens with RJ Davis is going to graduate. You never know who they're going to bring in instead. I think if they just kind of let Seth Trimble run the offense, that's in good hands. I think, having both those guys and Ian Jackson, there's a lot of mouths to feed, like you said, and that can kind of limit what Drake can do. If there's a real opportunity for him not to have the same usage and really skyrocket in that regard, he should come back. Otherwise, transfer or stay in the draft for me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want the North Carolina fans on my head for kind of hinting at transferring. I will say this. Hubert Davis is somewhat on the hot seat, but if Hubert Davis is back, I think he's going to lean more towards his veterans or players that he can trust over a freshman. We've kind of seen that. I mean, he was slow to bring Ian along. even though Ian was very, very highly touted coming out of high school. Last question for you before we wrap it up. In your opinion, what is wrong with North Carolina hoops right now? They've been able to recruit. We've seen that. But just overall, since their run to the Final Four a few years ago, in your opinion, what's wrong?
I mean, this year, I just don't think their bigs are,
yeah.
Like, to be blunt, I don't think they're that good. In college, you need a big to, like, if your guard play is elite plus, you can make up for it. I don't know if North Carolina has that. Like, I think they're very talented across the board. Their big men just don't do enough to truly move the needle, and I think that's where they're limited. I think they're on the right track, though, being able to start doing what they're doing with getting these high-level recruits. I think that really does help, but you have to be able to surround the team better. I like Van Allen a lot. Like, I think Lubin, excuse me, I almost called him Rubin. That's why I paused there. Like, I like him, but I think he's overplayed in a little bit. Like, he's playing a different role more than he should be. That kind of stuff. I think you got to attack the portal better to get those bigs.
Yeah, I agree 100%. With this era of basically free agency, when you're in North Carolina, you should be able to go get you a big. It's kind of like Kansas. Last year, Kansas said, we don't have any depth. What did they do? They went out and got AJ Stuhl and Ryland Griffin. I don't think it's helped their draft stock at all, but it has definitely given Kansas some depth. So anyway, I just wanted to hear your opinion. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast. Check out the Locked On newsletter at lockedondaily.com. Hopefully everyone has a great weekend. We will be podcasting throughout the weekend. Once again, it's Rafael with Richard Stayman, and we are